Hey guys, Chop here. Fate is a theme throughout Genshin Impact that only has a few details we know of, but I think I might have found who controls it. It's going to be a journey to get to that answer though, so I'm first of all going to name the 4 shining shades of the Primordial one, and I do mean name them with genuine names, before telling you about the Moon Sisters, where Fate comes from in Genshin, and then who controls it. Get your popcorn and strap in, because this is a very big theory. So, let's just firstly establish what we actually know about the Shades. We know that Teyvat had already existed before the arrival of the Creator God, just not as Teyvat is today. This Creator God, the Primordial one, made the mountains and the rivers, but also split itself into 4 shining shades. We know something for certain about 2 of these shades. One is called Kairos, or its forbidden name, Istaroth. This forbidden name is actually the Goetic name for the ruler of time that is based on the demon Astaroth. Astaroth is a Christian demon who willingly answers any questions regarding the past, present or future, and will give up any secrets that he knows. Our Genshin equivalent, Istaroth, also meddles with time, seeing as they're the ruler of it, so that's clearly the basis for naming Istaroth. The Enkanomiya name, Kairos, is actually Greek. The ancient Greeks had 2 words for time. The one you likely know is Chronos, which is essentially the measurement of time, and actually being able to say things like, it's 2 PM. That's what Chronos refers to. The other word is what Teyvat's ruler of time refers to, Kairos. This is more so the idea and notion of time, rather than counting it. It is the moments of time, which is actually what the scribe Istaroth refers to them as. So I guess Hoyoverse really nailed the translation on this one. The other shade we know about is not by name, but by what they did. Together with the Primordial one, this mysterious shade created animals, plants, and humans. Collectively, we obviously know these to all be life. So if we have a ruler of time, it's safe to say that this shade is the ruler of life. This means that we have 2 of the shades to find the identity of, and all we have is time and life to go off of. This part of the theory is not particularly groundbreaking if you've already heard of this, because I also subscribe to the idea that the artifacts are the shades. The names of the artifacts are as follows: Flower of Life, Plume of Death, Sands of Aeon, Goblet of Eonothum, and Circlet of Logos. Life would obviously refer to the ruler of life, and Aeon is a measurement of time equal to 1 billion years, which obviously refers to the ruler of time. So, extrapolating from this, we then also have a ruler of death, Eonothum, and Logos. Death is obvious and essentially just the counter to the ruler of life, whereas Eonothum is a little stranger. I derived the word back to Latin and it translates to something roughly like age of that which is placed, and it is only ever used for geology. This is definitely strange, at least. I mean, it's not like Zhongli is one of the shades. So I'm gonna skip over this one and come back to it. The final artifact is the Circlet of Logos. Finally, all of my research reading Gnostic academic papers has paid off. I've genuinely read so many essays and papers on this old religion to fully learn and interpret it, and you'll probably see that knowledge come out in future videos a little more. For now though, Logos is a somewhat wishy-washy term. It has been used as a name for Christ, as well as being linked to the Demiurge, and being the principle that connects the highest god to the material world. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense to most of you, and I am leaving a lot of information out, because people have written extensively on this in many different ways, and ultimately it's just overcomplicated. The crux of it is that it's related to the Demiurge, and sometimes can mean the same thing. The Demiurge is the Gnostic creator god of which Genshin's Primordial one is based on. So, the Circle of Logos is not the artifact of any shade, but the crown of the creator god of Teyvat. Okay, with that established, we know the Primordial one to be Logos, and they have 4 shades: time, life, death, and whatever Eonothum means. It's at this point in my research that I decided the English translator for the game might have just messed up using some random word. So I went to the original text in Chinese, and in the original language that Hoyoverse used to dub the goblet, they instead called it the Cup of Emptiness. This makes way more sense because we can extract a lot more from emptiness. Emptiness is just the lacking of substance. It's null, it's void, it is unoccupied space. Space, void, the sustainer of heavenly principles. These cosmic cubic space void attacks is the power of the ruler of space. You know, that being that could traverse space through portals, and her artifact is the Goblet of Eonothum. Okay, so now we have the ruler of time, space, life, and death as the 4 shades. Some of you may have already known this, but it's an important point to establish before we go deeper into the theory and naming them. Obviously, we have the name Kairos for the ruler of time, and their goetic name is Istaroth. We also have the name Sustainer of Heavenly Principles for the ruler of space, although this doesn't exactly feel like a name, more of a title, I suppose. That's not all that we're given though, because in the files for the game, we know them to also be called Asmodee. Asmodee is the forbidden goetic name of the Sustainer. The basis they get this from is the Ars Goetia, where Asmodee is the demonic version of the angel Asmodeus, who is a king of demons and also features as the antagonist in the Book of Tobit. I went through the book just to check if there are any other similarities besides both Genshin and Tobit featuring Asmodeus as their antagonist, but there wasn't really anything obvious, at least. That leaves both the normal names and goetic names for the ruler of life and death, as well as the normal name for the Sustainer, presumably before they went crazy killing people. Well, the normal names for the two shades are actually really easy to work out. In the achievements list for Enkanomiya, there are 12 achievements to collect. 3 of them are called Kairos' Constancy. 6 of the other achievements also have mysterious names. 3 are called Hesperus' Boons, and another 3 named Phosphorus' Guidance. Given that they all have a similar theme, and we know Kairos as the ruler of time, it's safe to assume that Hesperus and Phosphorus are also the names of 2 other shades. In Greek mythology, Hesperus is the evening star, and Phosphorus is actually called Phosphorus and is the morning star. Given that these two are basically just opposites of the same principle, I would assume these to be the names of the other non-corrupt shades, life and death. I think the promise of the day that comes with the morning stars better suits life than the ending of the day with the evening stars, which better suits the ending of life, or death. Therefore, I argue that we have Kairos as time, Phosphorus as life, and Hesperus as death. It's really hard to say what the Enkanomians would have called space though, but continuing the theme of the ancient Greeks, I will theorize her to be named either Chaos, meaning void, Korra, meaning space, or Astraeus, who is an astrological deity that derived from star. It's really hard to guess which one though, but I think Korra makes the most sense, given that it refers to space. Okay, so we have the Enkanomiya names as well as the domains of all the shades, but only 2 goetic names, Asmodee and Istaroth. For the other 2 names, I had to go through all 72 demons in the Ars Goetia to work this out. I'm pretty happy with the one I found for death, but life less so. Still somewhat happy though. See, the artifacts are all items possessed by the shades, so a flower from life, sands from time, etc. So a feather being from death must mean that death is some kind of bird thing? Luckily, one of the demons from the Goetia is a phoenix that governs death and rebirth. I think this is the most fitting possibility for death, and thus I think the shade of death is called Phoenix. The last remaining one is life, which is a little harder. The best I could find was Amon, who is a lord of life and whose power increases tenfold during the day, which would fit with their Enkanomiya name, Phosphorus, being the morning stars. The final way I want to categorize the shades before we get to the rest of the theory is by colour. My first theory was the elemental colour theory, in which I argued that the term shades is very odd and refers only to light. So, if the primordial one splits into at least 7 colours of elements, then the shades must be the 4 most foundational colours that can make everything: red, green, yellow, and blue. I think we all know that green is life, because that just is the colour that always represents it. I also think that yellow is for space because the Sustainer's eyes and cubes were yellow. Given that time was also referred to as the Thousand Winds and Anemo is a colour between green and blue, I'm going to give the colour blue to time, because green is taken, basically. Finally, that leaves red for death, which works quite well with the goetic name Phoenix, where they should be a red phoenix. So, to summarise the collection of characters, the primordial ones split into 4 shades that govern the world. These are the rulers of time, space, life, and death. Time is Istaroth, or Kairos, and is represented by the colour blue. Life is Amon, or Phosphorus, and is represented by the colour green. Death is Phoenix, or Hesperus, and is represented by the colour red. Finally, space is Asmodee, or Korra, or the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, and is represented by the colour yellow. Now that we have their names and their artifacts, we can start peeking into a couple of the places and discover new territory. The most immediate one to me is regarding the Moon Sisters, who are all in love with the morning stars. The morning stars are completely personified here, with not only being given the concept of love, but their own chambers too. Using our naming scheme earlier, where we know the ruler of life is Phosphorus, who in Greek mythology was the morning stars, we can imagine that the Moon Sisters were in love with the ruler of life. And this is where we get into some very speculative but exciting territory, because what determines fate in Genshin? Well, just like half the girls I've dated, Genshin uses astrology to foretell fate. Both Mona and her master Barbeloth use hydromancy to look at the stars to get people's destiny. Interestingly enough, the constellation of characters we're all used to are a little more specific in the original Chinese translation of the game. They call it the constellation of fate for each and individual character. So Ito is fated by the stars that resemble a Taurus, Tikunadi is fated by the stars that resemble a fox, so on and so on. What I find particularly interesting though, is how we know that not only the sky is fake, so presumably the stars are as well, but that we've seen the stars be personified in books within the world. So if the stars truly are a being, and that being is confined to Teyvat within these fake borders, then who are they? We've already talked about two of the shades being represented by stars in their real world equivalent, and don't worry, I did double check the translation and it's the same in Chinese. If life is the morning stars and that signifies the beginning of one's fate, then death being the evening stars could signify the ending of one's fate. We cannot assume there being one entity controlling fate here, because we're using the connection of two separate characters, both representing the fated stars. Okay, so life starts fate and death ends it. Where does Genshin get this story from? We know very well that they get the idea of basically every part of the lore from some culture. Probably the most famous culture that uses fate is the ancient Greek mythology, whereby three sisters weave the threads of fate, the Moirai sisters. This was Clotho who spun the thread of life, Lachesis who measured it, and Atropos cut the thread, signifying death. Hang on, there's a lot to unpack here immediately. Clotho starts fate with life, just like we theorised the Shade of Life does. We also have Atropos ending fate with death, just like we theorised the Shade of Death to do. And finally, fate is represented by threads woven. And this one we know to be true, because of the Loom of Fate that we've heard of several times, mainly in the context of the Abyss. There is another time we've heard it though. It's in the Teyvat chapter storyline preview video from about 2.5 years ago. At the end of our journey, we are to defeat Dainsleif to prove our worth as the one to reweave the threads of fate. There's just one question left though. Who's the second Moirai sister in Genshin? We don't have the equivalent of Lachesis here, the measure of fate that decided how long someone's fate shall last. Yes, we are talking about time, so also yes, I'm going to assume it's the obvious choice of being the ruler of time, Istaroth. I mean, their artifact is a timepiece that literally measures time. I also need to credit a fellow theorist here, Roosevelt, for this next evidence. The Enkanomiya name, Kairos, also can refer to a moment in weaving when the shuttle passes through threads on a loom. There's just too much right with this to ignore. My theory, given all the evidence I provided to you, with the achievement names referencing shades that are represented by the stars that determine fate as well as the artifact theory, is that fate is sown by the shade of life, time, and death. Not the Moon Sisters, who are all dead, or some new batch of possibilities, because let's be honest, that's bordering on absurd for people down the road who don't follow the law. You can't tell me that they're going to be able to introduce so many celestial entities without it feeling confusing or overwhelming to the average player. It's going to have to simplify towards the actual release of this information. The simple answer to the question is that it's just these really strong and important figures. There is something left though that just doesn't feel right. Why is there a fourth shade that isn't related to this fate, and we know that we're going to have to fight them towards the climax of the game? Also, what's up with the Loom of Fate? We know, thanks to the Teyvat chapter trailer, that we are going to reweave fate later on using it, so where are the three shades here? In fact, how come the Sinner in Caribert is able to imbue the Loom of Fate with a Hilichurl? Something doesn't feel right about all this, despite the puzzle pieces fitting together. It's almost as if fate is out of control. Like the shades don't have it anymore, and that the Abyssor is the one trying to get the Loom of Fate, which we then have to steal from the Abyss at the end of the game to make fate ours. The sinner who had the Loom of Fate had stolen it from the Shades and then hid it back, which is why they imprisoned him. If you believe my theory from a while back that this sinner is the second who came, then perhaps you can also believe that Fate has been disjointed ever since his arrival, with the Primordial One no longer sharing the same love for humanity that they once had. Maybe it's because of them stealing Fate, and they've not been able to get it back since. The Abyss Order is the one with it now, and we're going to have to take it from them. I do wonder where the Sustainer fits in this picture though, and I wonder where the other Shades are now. It's possible that they're dead, but I don't think so. There's no evidence to believe it at least. I think they're still up there in Celestia or the Lunar Palace. I'm just concerned what their stance is, especially considering that we're going to take their job at weaving fate. My current hypothesis is that time, life, and death are all good, and only space is evil. But maybe these three shades are stuck or hidden somewhere. It is only a hypothesis though, not a theory. A game theory! Well, that's who used to control Fate in Teyvat, and who will control Fate in Teyvat. Also, finding two separate names for each shade, as well as their domain and their colour, which I feel like maybe should be a greater priority than the Fate theory, but hey ho. So, what do you guys think about all this? Do you agree about the names of the shades and with who controls Fate? Or do you have another theory on it? Let me know in the comments. Hey, I mean, I was only able to do this theory thanks to one of your comments, so massive shout out to you. Until my next video though, chop out, bye.